The sky didn't split, it surrendered. One clean break across the heavens, like something ancient giving way at last. On Arkin 7, silence always came first. No thunder, no roar, just a cold shift in pressure and the whisper of death slipping through the clouds. Stuart Hale watched it fall from the edge of a rusted platform, snow catching in his beard. The ship, a thin-winged shuttle, likely short-range, corkscrewed as it descended, trailing smoke like a severed artery. It vanished behind the ridge in the west, beyond the buried antenna field. He didn't move. He'd seen too many ships drop from the sky. Corporate drones, smugglers, sometimes escape pod from systems too far out. They always came down broken, and they always came alone. This one just happened to fall close enough to matter. He turned, eyes narrowing against the wind. His scarf was already rimed with frost. The sled wouldn't make it far in this weather, but he couldn't carry back a body on foot. Not if it was whole, and not if it was bleeding. If it was still breathing. Back in the outpost, the heater coughed thin warmth into the recycled air, struggling as it always did. Stuart pulled his coat tighter and shoved spare rations, sealant wraps, and a battered medkit into the sled's cargo bin. He paused by the door, letting his hand rest on the old mining ID bolted above the exit. It was rusted beyond recognition, but the shape was still there. The emblem of Arkin 7, forgotten by everyone except the man too broken to leave it behind. The sled roared reluctantly to life, thrumming beneath him as he directed it toward the crash site. Wind howled low between metal struts and skeletal towers, old cranes towering like frozen giants above the snow. The sky was bruised gray, flat and endless. This world had once throbbed with industry. Now it was just bones and storms. He reached the ridge in 20 minutes. The shuttle had carved a shallow trench in the ice before finally coming to rest against a rusted mining structure. Its hull was crumpled, steam rising in hisses from fissures where coolant met frozen ground. Fire licked out from a broken panel, struggling to survive the wind. He parked the sled and stepped cautiously into the wreckage, boots crunching over ice-streaked metal. There was no sound, no movement, just the low groan of steel surrendering to cold. Then he heard it. Not a voice, not words, just breath. Uneven, shallow, painful. He found her half buried beneath twisted beams and melted ice, her body curled in on itself as if trying to disappear. Her skin was a deep, soft green, dusted with frost. Long black hair tangled around her face, matted with blood. Her lips were cracked. Her eyes were shut tight, lashes trembling. Her right arm was a disaster, bent where it shouldn't be, the angle impossible. The limb was swollen from shoulder to wrist, darkened at the edges by internal bleeding and frostbite. The elbow joint was grotesquely misshapen, the bones clearly snapped. He crouched beside her, breath ghosting in the air. "Hey," he said, voice low, steady. "Don't move. You're alive. That's enough for now." She didn't respond. Her face was sharp-featured but elegant. Not human, not even close. Her ears swept back into delicate ridges, and faint patterns were etched into the skin at her temples. Scars, maybe. Tattoos. Some symbol of belonging or abandonment. Stuart reached slowly for her shoulder. The moment his gloved fingers made contact, her eyes snapped open. Bright gold. They locked onto him instantly, wide with panic. She thrashed, not wildly. She didn't have the strength, but it was enough to make her cry out. A short, broken sound, strangled in her throat as pain overtook her. "Easy," he murmured, raising both hands. "I'm not here to hurt you." Her breathing sped up. She tried to crawl back, but the beam over her hip kept her pinned. Her broken arm dragged across the ground, and she screamed, a raw, involuntary noise that made him flinch despite himself. Okay, don't move. Just don't move." The snow was turning pink beneath her, a thin ribbon of blood snaking out from her torn jumpsuit. The suit was unfamiliar, some hybrid weave of organic fiber and tech mesh, but it was shredded, useless now. He needed to stop the bleeding. Fast. Stuart pulled out his medkit with practiced hands. He worked quietly, methodically, as he cut open the sleeve around her injured arm. The flesh was swollen tight, the skin taut and purple with bruising. Beneath that, bones grated with the smallest movement. The break was bad, compound fracture, maybe more. She'd be lucky to keep function, let alone avoid infection. He slipped a small pain stem in her neck. She flinched again, but didn't pull away. Either she understood what he was doing, or she was just too cold to resist. She was trembling violently now, her body racked with microspasms. Her jaw locked to keep her teeth from chattering. Stewart wrapped a strip of cloth around the worst of the bleeding and began constructing a basic splint. Metal rods from the sled's repair kit, gauze, thermal padding. His hands moved without thinking. There was no one else to help. No one else left. "Sorry," he said as he tightened the wrap. "This is going to hurt." She whimpered. Her eyes didn't leave his. Her entire body shuddered as he aligned the bones by feel, adjusting the angle just enough to keep pressure off the joint. He worked fast, but not rough. She bit down on her lip until it bled, chest heaving, eyes wet, not with tears, but from sheer, unrelenting pain. He didn't remember the last time he'd touched another living being. Not like this. Not to help. Not gently. "You're going to make it," he said, though he wasn't sure she understood. "You're not dying in the snow today." She said nothing, but she didn't fight him. By the time the splint was in place, her eyelids were drooping, pupils flickering. He wrapped her in 2 emergency blankets and lifted her into the sled. She was light, too light, malnourished, probably, underfed and under-equipped for the climate. She whimpered again, low and raw in her throat. As he pulled the sled cover over them both and turned toward the shelter, she blinked up at him again. Her gold eyes weren't filled with trust, but they weren't filled with fear anymore, either. That had to count for something. Back at the outpost, the heater barely kept the cold at bay, but it was shelter. He laid her on the padded bench beside the generator, closest to the heat, and began removing the shredded jumpsuit in pieces. The cold had burned her skin in patches. He applied a neutralizing salve, alien-compatible, one of the few things the Corps had left behind when they bailed on Arkan 7. She tensed when his fingers brushed the inside of her wrist. Then, slowly, she relaxed. Only a little. He placed a bowl of warm soup beside her mouth. She blinked at it as if unsure it was real. Her lips moved, silent. A word? A name? She took it, both hands trembling. Her first sip was too fast. She choked. He steadied the bowl. "Easy," he said, softer now. "Take your time." A single tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. Later, she slept. Or tried to. Her body twitched every few minutes, reflex maybe, pain maybe, trauma. But her breathing grew steadier, slower. Stewart sat across the room, fingers running absently over a cracked fuse he wasn't fixing. She was alive. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her species, or her story, or why she'd fallen from the sky. But something in her had not broken. Not yet. And for the first time in 3 years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like waiting. It felt like hope. The generator sputtered once, coughed out a plume of heat, then settled back into its familiar, low hum. Outside, the wind clawed at the shelter's steel frame, but couldn't quite get in. Not tonight. Stewart leaned over the small stove, stirring a pot of thin root stew. The smell wasn't much, but it was warm, and warm was enough. Behind him, the woman, still unknown, still unnamed, lay tucked under a layered pile of blankets, her breathing steadier than the night before. Her skin, a muted forest green, no longer looked ghostly. Her cheeks carried a faint flush, almost like life was returning to her inch by inch. Her eyes opened slowly. The golden irises caught the light, but she didn't flinch this time. She looked at him, really looked. "How's the arm?" he asked, not expecting an answer. She didn't give one, just shifted, winced, and slowly sat up against the wall. He walked over and crouched beside her. "Swelling's down." He said more to himself, scanning the splint. "Still needs cleaning." And a new wrap. Her gaze dropped her arm. She studied it like it belonged to someone else, like she hadn't decided yet whether it was worth the pain it was causing her. "I'll be careful," he said, voice low, steady. This time, when he reached for her, she didn't pull away. She lifted her good hand slowly and rested it over her injured forearm, as if to say, I know. I'll help. That one gesture told him more than words ever could. She didn't trust him yet, not fully, but she no longer saw him as a threat. That was progress. He began to unwrap the stained cloth, his fingers methodical, precise. She hissed once, a sharp intake of breath when the cold air touched raw skin. Her arm was still an angry mess of purples and sickly blues, but the worst of the bleeding had stopped. The bones had stayed in place, which meant his field splint had done its job. When he reached for the bottle of antiseptic, she tensed. He hesitated. This'll burn, he said. She met his eyes and gave the smallest nod. He dabbed the solution over her skin in slow, gentle strokes. Her jaw clenched, nostrils flaring with each pass. Her breathing stayed shallow, but steady. She didn't cry out. You've done this before, he murmured. It wasn't really a question. She didn't answer. Instead, she surprised him. As he reached for the fresh bandage wrap, she adjusted her arm on her own, lifting it slightly to make his work easier. Her fingers trembled from the effort, her whole body taut with restraint, but she was helping. Together, in silence, they rewrapped her wound. It wasn't just survival now. It was cooperation. Healing, not just tending. When he finished, he looked up, and for the first time, she didn't immediately avert her gaze. Her golden eyes held his just for a moment. Not gratitude, not affection, but acknowledgement, recognition. He stood and walked back to the stove, ladled soup into 2 cups, and handed one to her. She stared at it, then took it carefully with her good hand. She brought it to her lips and drank more slowly this time, not desperate, just cautious. You need a name, he said. Something to call you. She blinked. Then, barely audible, she whispered Sarai. He froze, not because she'd spoken, though that was startling enough, but because of the sound of it. Her voice was soft, like a whisper wrapped in sand, the kind of voice that didn't expect to be heard. Sarai, he repeated, testing the shape of it in his mouth. That yours? She nodded once. A name, a connection. He set his soup down, wiped his hands on a rag, and leaned back against the opposite wall. I'm Stuart. Hail, if we're being formal. But just Stuart's fine. No reply, but her gaze lingered. The wind rattled the shelter. The walls moaned softly in the cold, like something remembering what it used to be. How'd you end up here? He asked after a long pause. Not much traffic this far out. She stared at her cup. The shadows under her eyes deepened. She didn't speak. He didn't press. Not tonight. He gestured toward the arm. That's going to take time. I'll check it again in the morning. You'll need to start moving the fingers soon. Keep circulation up. She flexed them slightly. They barely moved, but they moved. That's good, he said. That's real good. He almost smiled. When the heater dimmed for the night cycle, he handed her an extra blanket. She took it, wrapping it tight around her shoulders. She didn't lie down. Instead, she sat upright against the wall, head tilted slightly as she watched him begin to power down the main systems. Do you sleep? She asked. He looked at her, surprised again. Her voice was still quiet, hesitant, but she was reaching out now. Sometimes, he said, when the roof doesn't creak and the generator doesn't cough. Her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but something moved there, something softer. He lay down on the cot across from her, arms behind his head. This place used to hum with people. Noise. Machines. Now it's just the wind. Gets inside your head after a while. She closed her eyes. I don't mind quiet, she said. Neither did he. But something about this kind of quiet, the kind where another person was breathing in the same room, the kind where you didn't have to fill the silence to make it mean something, felt different. Felt like healing. Felt like maybe he wasn't the only broken thing learning how to come back to life. He watched her for a while longer, until her head tilted and her breathing slowed, shallow but steady. She didn't lie flat. She wasn't ready for that. But she was sleeping, sitting upright, wrapped tight, still watching the door, even in rest. He understood that instinct too well. And in the dim red glow of the generator light, he let his own eyes close. Outside, the snow fell quietly. It always did. But inside, for the first time in years, there was more than survival happening. There was something beginning, something human, or maybe something that didn't need to be. A few days had passed since Stuart last changed Sarai's bandages. The worst of the swelling had gone, and though her arm was still weak, she could move it now, slowly, carefully, but on her own. Inside, Sarai sat on the padded bench near the heater, her shoulders wrapped in a worn thermal blanket, steam from a half-full mug curling up around her face. Her green skin looked brighter today, more alive under the warm light of the auxiliary lamp. A hint of color had returned to her cheeks, and a sharp twitch in her jaw had softened since the last time Stuart had reset the splint on her arm. The worst of the swelling had subsided. The break, though still healing, no longer throbbed with every breath she took. The skin around the injury had faded from angry purple and black to the mottled yellow of deep bruising. There was a stiffness in the way she moved, but not the glassy, helpless look of someone barely holding on. She was coming back, slowly, but surely. Stuart crouched beside her now, laying out fresh strips of cloth and antiseptic beside a compact bundle of tools. "We'll rewrap it today," he said, his voice calm and quiet. "Check the alignment, clean the skin, maybe start light movement." Sarai gave a small nod. Her eyes dropped to her hand, the one that had been dead weight for too long. She flexed her fingers. A twitch, a bend, not much, but not nothing. She looked up at him, and for a moment, Stuart saw it, the flicker of hope behind her exhaustion. Not the desperate kind, the real kind, earned and honest and uncertain. He reached out, palm up. "May I?" She extended her arm toward him, slow and careful. Her fingers hovered above his palm, hesitant, but then she placed her hand in his. Voluntarily, he felt the weight of that gesture. It wasn't about pain anymore. It wasn't even about fear. It was trust. He began to unwrap the dressing with patient hands. Each layer peeled away smoothly, revealing the skin beneath. There was still swelling near the wrist, and the muscles had clearly atrophied, but the bones had held firm. His improvised splint had done its job. He felt a small thread of pride tighten in his chest. "You're healing well," he said, inspecting the arm with practiced eyes. "You've got more control today. That's a good sign." Sarai didn't speak. She watched his hands instead, her gaze intense, like she was studying not just what he was doing, but how he was doing it. Gentle, precise, intentional. When he reached for the antiseptic, she tensed slightly, then caught herself. Her breath hitched, but she didn't pull away. He caught the moment, saw the way she steeled herself, how her fingers tightened just slightly on the edge of the blanket. "I'll be quick," he said. She nodded. "I know." The liquid hissed as it touched her skin. Her face flinched, but not her body. She held still. When he was done, he reached behind him and brought out a narrow metal bar, no longer than a handspan, with 5 colored dots lit along its edge. "What is that?" she asked. "Grip trainer," he said. "Old prototype from the mining days. Used to help techs with nerve regeneration after compression suit damage. You squeeze it. When your pressure's right, the lights change." She hesitated. "That's not from before." "No, this one's clean. It's yours now." He placed it in her palm. She took it in both hands and squeezed. The lights flickered, then one turned green. Her breath caught. "Try again," he encouraged. She did. 2 greens. 1 yellow. "It's working," she said, barely above a whisper. "You're getting stronger." Sarai looked down at the bar. "Not fast enough." He gave a small laugh. "Healing isn't a race. Believe me, I tried to outrun grief for years. It doesn't work." She glanced up at him sharply. "Your wife." He froze for a moment, then nodded. "She was on this planet too?" "Yeah." Before it all went silent. "What happened?" He exhaled slowly. "A systems collapse. One of the deep core regulators failed during an inspection cycle. She was inside. The pressure breach tore the chamber apart before anyone could override it. I was working 3 levels up. I should have seen the warning signs. Should have caught the anomaly." Sarai studied his face as he spoke. "You blame yourself. Every day. Even now. Especially now." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I used to think shame was what kept me alive. That if I stopped feeling it, I'd disappear. that it was the only thing they hadn't stolen from me. And now I think it was something else. What? She looked him straight in the eyes. Hope. That word had weight, not a delicate, fairy tale softness, but a hard-earned, callous kind of hope. The kind that's clawed out from under wreckage, that still bleeds when it breathes. Stuart reached for the grip bar again, adjusted the resistance, and handed it back. Let's test it. 5 squeezes. Then a stretch. She followed his instructions without complaint. Her arm trembled with effort. Her jaw clenched, but she didn't stop. When it became too much, she set the device down and rested her hand on her thigh, breathing hard. Hurts, she said. I know. Feels good. He tilted his head. That's new. It means it's mine now, she said. Not theirs. She looked up at him again, and this time, her expression was something new. Not guarded, not grateful, just real, like she belonged here. Not as a guest, not as a patient, as someone who had earned her place. I want to help, she said suddenly. With what? Whatever you do. Around here. Fixing things. Cleaning. Cooking while trying. I don't want to be someone you're always rescuing. You're not. But I want to give something back. He nodded. All right. They stood in silence for a while after that, side by side, watching the snow fall through the small, fogged window. Outside, Arkin, 7 was the same unyielding grave of steel and ice it had always been. But in here, something different pulsed beneath the surface. Stuart reached out and picked up a small component, an old circuit coil, still half intact. He turned it in his hands, then handed it to her. Here, he said, start with this. See if you can figure out what's wrong. She turned it over thoughtfully. And if I break it, I'll fix it. She smiled again, and this time it reached her eyes. They worked together until the light faded. The quiet wasn't oppressive anymore. It was rhythmic, shared, necessary. That night, as she settled into the cot near the generator, Sarai looked at her hand, flexed it, rolled her wrist. She could still feel the dull ache, but it wasn't the ache of damage. It was the ache of rebuilding. And when Stuart passed her the old thermal blanket, their fingers brushed, and she didn't pull away. Not this time. Not ever again. She looked at him and whispered, "Good night." He answered without hesitation. "Good night, Sarai." She smiled, and for the first time since crashing into this frozen world, she slept not as someone recovering, but as someone finally beginning again. The wind had gone quiet. That didn't happen often on Arkin 7. Stuart noticed the stillness the moment he stepped outside. No screaming gusts, no hiss of snow against metal, just the heavy silence of a dead world holding its breath. He paused at the edge of the platform, letting his eyes sweep across the white wasteland. The towers in the distance leaned at strange angles, their rusting frames barely visible beneath layers of snow. The sky hung low, heavy with clouds that never broke. There was no sun to measure time by here. Only habit, only memory. Inside the shelter, Sarai was sleeping, really sleeping for the first time since she arrived. Not propped up against the wall, not curled in a wary half-ball. She was lying flat, face turned slightly toward the heater, lips parted just enough to let her breath come and go in soft rhythm. Her injured hand rested on her chest, fingers loosely curled. Her color had returned. Her body had stopped shaking. Stuart hadn't meant to stand there staring at her, but when he brought her food and found her that way, peaceful, unguarded, he didn't want to break the moment. So he left the bowl quietly on the nearby crate and stepped out into the cold. Now, out here, he let himself breathe. He hadn't told her yet, not the whole story. She'd shared her past in pieces, enough for him to start imagining the shape of it. And it wasn't pretty, but he hadn't returned the favor. Not fully. That part of him, the part that remembered, had stayed locked away. Maybe it was time. When he stepped back inside, the shelter felt warmer than it had any right to be. Sarai was awake now, sitting up, the blanket wrapped around her like a shawl. The food was half-eaten. She was sipping water with both hands, one strong, the other still slow, but moving more freely every day. He sat across from her, setting a small, worn object on the table between them. A brass medallion, scratched and dull. Its face bore a faded insignia, 3 staggered mountain peaks over a field of stars. Corporate mining badge. Arkan Systems. She looked at it, then at him. You wore that, she asked. 10 years, he said. Systems engineer. Structural stabilization, environmental support. We kept the miners breathing and the buildings standing. You built this place? Maintained it, mostly. By the time I got here, the core was already drilled out. They knew the site was drying up, but they needed warm bodies to keep it functional until the last haulers cleared out. Why did you stay? She asked. He was quiet for a long time. My wife, he said finally. Her name was Lorna. She worked with me, same unit. We weren't supposed to be stationed together, but sometimes things fall through the cracks. We kept it quiet. It was a stupid little secret, but it made us feel whole. He looked at his hands, resting on his knees. She died in a systems failure. One of the support struts buckled during an atmospheric compression test. The alert failed. She was inside. Sarai's eyes didn't leave him. After that, I couldn't go back. Not to Earth, not to anywhere else. There were hearings, investigations. They cleared me, said it was equipment failure, not human error. But I was the one who signed off on the maintenance report. I missed the crack in the joint seal. He let out a slow, bitter breath. So I stayed. Everyone else packed up and left. I told them I'd volunteer to monitor the decommissioning remotely. But the truth is, no one cared. They were done with Arkan 7. So they left me here. To die. Sarai asked softly. To disappear. Sarai looked at the badge again. And you did. For a while. He met her eyes. Then you fell out of the sky. She didn't smile, but her gaze warmed. You don't speak like a man who disappeared. I don't feel like one anymore, he admitted. There was a silence then, but not an empty one. It felt like something being rebuilt, brick by brick. She reached toward the badge, touching it with her fingers. Her hand still trembled slightly, but she didn't pull back. My name wasn't always Sarai, she said. He leaned forward. What was it? She hesitated. I don't remember. He blinked. You don't remember your name? She shook her head. When they take you young enough, they erase everything. Your family, your language, your culture. The syndicate buys children from failing colonies, or takes them when parents can't pay debts. I was sold when I was 6, maybe 7. I don't know for sure. Her voice was detached, like she was telling someone else's story. I worked in transit, cleaning crew, waste disposal. Later, courier service. But I was always property, always on a leash. She touched the side of her neck, where a faint scar ran along the edge of her collarbone. They used implants to track us. Shock collars for disobedience. I watched people die for stepping out of line. Others vanished overnight. What happened? Stewart asked. To the ship you were on? Engine failure during a jump. The ship dropped out mid-transit, close enough to the atmosphere of a dead rock to be pulled in. Most of the crew didn't survive the crash. I ran before the syndicate could send a recovery signal. I didn't think I'd make it far. You did, he said. Because of you. She looked down at her arm. You've seen me at my worst, and you didn't turn away. He shook his head. You don't know what I've seen. I don't need to. I know what I've felt. Another long silence. But this one pulsed with something deeper. A current under the surface neither of them could quite name yet. She looked at him then, not guarded, not careful, just open. I want to remember who I was before they named me Sarai. You will, he said, if that's what you want. I think it is. She stood, slowly, and walked to the edge of the room. Her steps were uneven, but steady. Her bare feet made no sound against the metal floor. She placed her hand on the window, where the ice had begun to gather again. What happens now? She asked. Stewart joined her, standing at her side. We survive, he said, and then we choose. She looked at him. Together, he nodded. Outside, the snow began to fall again, slow, silent, endless. But inside the shelter, 2 people who had been buried by the past began, finally, to rise. The wind outside had changed. It no longer screamed as it scraped across the towers of Arkan 7. Now it pulsed low and slow, like it was learning to breathe again. Less like a warning, more like a rhythm. The storms hadn't stopped. This planet didn't forgive that easily. But inside the shelter, things were beginning to shift. Stewart noticed it first in the small things. Sarai woke up before him now, her steps softer, steadier. She no longer stared at the door when she sat near it. Her eyes weren't always watching for the next threat or the next command. She asked questions now about the heater, the water recycler, the way he'd rewired the light relay in the far wall so it wouldn't flicker during brownouts. Not out of idle curiosity, but with genuine interest. She listened. She remembered. She belonged. Her arm was nearly healed. The bones had knit together with surprising speed, though the muscle was still rebuilding itself. She could carry her own weight now. She looked down at her hand like it was something foreign she was only now learning how to command again. "I want more to do," she said. "Not just lifting things. Real tasks. Repairs. Circuits. I want to learn." He nodded. "I've been waiting for you to ask." He handed her a small terminal core with exposed wires and a melted connector pin. "Try fixing this. No tools yet. Just look. Tell me what's wrong." She turned it over in her hands, eyes scanning the interior. "Heat damage," she said. "2 nodes burned. And this line, power surge." "Exactly." She handed it back. "I've had a lot of time to watch you work. You learn fast." "I was never allowed to learn anything before," she said quietly. "Only repeat. Only obey." He sat down across from her. "Then we'll unlearn that first." They worked together for hours. Stuart leaned against the counter, wiping his hands on a rag. "You're better than half the techs they use to station here." "I was never allowed near machinery before," she said. "Too valuable to risk injury." "That's what they used to say. You weren't a person to them. I was property. But here," she looked around the shelter. "Here, I'm more. You are." She turned to face him fully. "And I don't want to be just someone you fixed." Stuart didn't flinch at the word. "You're not. I want to give something back," she said. "To you. To this place. To whatever it is we're building." He didn't answer right away. Not because he didn't have words, but because they didn't seem necessary. She stepped closer. "Stuart," she said. He met her gaze. She reached out slowly, no hesitation this time, and took his wrist in her hand. Her touch was warm, firm, steady. Her fingers wrapped around his arm, just below the sleeve where the skin was bare. But between them, there was nothing but breath and heartbeat, and something slow, deep, and fragile rising to the surface. "I don't know how to do this," Sarai admitted. "Do what?" "This. Wanting someone." Her voice didn't waver, but her eyes did. "Not because I'm afraid of you," she added quickly. "I'm not. It's me I don't trust. What if I forget how to stay soft when I'm not scared anymore?" Stuart reached out carefully and took her hand, his fingers warm against her palm. She didn't flinch. "Not anymore. You've already stayed," he said. "You already chose softness. You chose me." Her lips parted slightly, a sharp breath catching in her throat. Then she leaned in, not much, not all the way, but enough that the air between them changed. She was close now, close enough that he could see the faint freckles across her cheeks, the way her hair curled near her temple, the gold in her eyes catching the light. Her expression wasn't desperate or rushed. It was careful, open. "I remember how I feel now more than how I felt then. That's what's winning." He squeezed her hand gently. "You're here. That's what matters." She nodded. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with something steadier, lighter. They stayed like that until the light dimmed and the generator shifted to its low-energy cycle. Then, without a word, they began preparing for evening together. That night, she stirred the stew while he adjusted the intake filters. She handed him tools before he asked. He read her movements as easily as he would a circuit diagram. When they sat down to eat, she didn't hesitate to take the first bite. And later, when the lights were low and the storm had curled back around the shelter like a sleeping beast, they sat on the floor, shoulder to shoulder, fingers still loosely twined. Neither of them said much. They didn't have to, because this wasn't a story about rescue anymore. It was a story about rebuilding. Together. This morning, Stuart had found her kneeling beside the old solar converter, stripping insulation from a faulty cable. Her head was tilted slightly, her white hair tucked behind her ear, brows furrowed as she worked. She looked focused, present. Her movements were deliberate, her muscles precise. When she sensed him watching, she didn't freeze or shrink back. She just looked over her shoulder and said, "I think this junction's misaligned. See the copper?" He crossed the room and crouched beside her. You're right. That one's corroded. She held out the tool without asking. You have the new filament? He did. They worked side by side for over an hour, exchanging few words, but never needing many. When they finished, she sat back, flexing her fingers slowly, then reached for a strip of cloth and wiped sweat from her brow. Her skin shimmered faintly in the filtered light, still green, still alien, but no longer unfamiliar. I didn't think I'd ever use this arm again, she said. Sarai stood near the back table, her long hair pulled into a loose braid that spilled down her back. She was lifting a sealed container of water packs, nothing heavy but enough to test her arm. And she wasn't testing it anymore. She was using it, naturally, without thought. She carried the crate across the room, her posture balanced, her steps sure. Stuart watched from the center of the room, a wrench still in his hand. He didn't move to help, not because he didn't care, but because she didn't need it. That realization came with a quiet satisfaction, the kind that didn't require words. She set the crate down gently, then turned toward him. I still feel it, she said. The break. Pain. No, just memory. It's in the way I lift things, the way I move, like my body remembers the damage, even though it's not there anymore. He nodded. It will for a while. That's not a flaw. It's part of healing. Her golden eyes lingered on his face. Do you feel that too? He walked over and leaned beside her, eyes scanning the pot. Should we mark the calendar? She gave him a sly look. We don't have a calendar. We should build one. Days like this deserve to be remembered. Because the stew didn't burn? Because you're smiling. Sarai let out a soft breath and dipped her spoon again. I used to be afraid of this kind of quiet. What kind? The kind that doesn't expect anything from you. That just is. I thought if I let my guard down, something would break me. But nothing's broken today. Nothing's even cracking. That's the point of days like this, he said. They remind you what it's like when nothing hurts. She didn't answer for a moment, just stirred. Then she said, I didn't think I'd live long enough to learn what contentment felt like. You're not just alive, he said. You're living. She turned toward him slowly, her expression unreadable, but her eyes were glowing with something gentle and quiet and profound. Like what? Warm, relaxed. Here, I like you better like this too, he replied. She turned her face toward his. And there was again that quiet pause in the air, the space where a choice could be made or not. The moment was not born of urgency, nor lust, nor need. It was born of comfort, of trust, of love. He raised his hand and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, fingertips trailing lightly along the edge of her cheek. She turned her face into his palm. I think, she said quietly, I've never loved someone like this before. Like what? Gently. He leaned in, not suddenly, not forcefully, and their lips met in a kiss that melted time. It was soft at first, a brush, then fuller, deeper. Her hand rose to cradle the back of his neck, and his other arm wrapped around her waist, drawing her closer. There was no fear in the kiss, no tremble, no memory of pain, only presence, only this. You didn't find it, he said. You built it. We did. Later, they shared a meal in the quiet. She laughed when the stew bubbled too fast and splashed her hand, and he handed her a cloth with mock solemnity. They spoke of simple things, repair cycles, inventory, the stubborn radio coil that still flickered every third hour. But between the words were glances, smiles, the kind of small touches that said more than any conversation ever could. When the day grew long and the light faded into soft twilight, they sat by the window, watching the gray horizon blur into the frost-covered hills. The world beyond was still silent, still empty, but not inside. Here, inside the walls of a forgotten mining shelter, two people had rewritten the rules of survival. They had turned need into care, wounds into warmth, silence into something sacred. No repairs, no drills, no salvage, no training. Just be. Stuart smiled. I might not know what to do with that much peace. You'll survive, she teased. I've survived worse. They spent the afternoon doing nothing and everything. She cleaned the tools while humming something faint and strange, a melody he didn't recognize, but that made the air feel softer. He replaced the cracked viewport cover, even though no wind had breached it in weeks. Together, they reorganized the storage closet, not because they had to, but because they could. Because choosing to share labor without desperation was a kind of love, too. Later, they shared a cup of heated spice water while Sarai read through one of Stuart's old maintenance logs, laughing at how bitter he'd been during early weather tests. "You really wrote, 'This system is a joke designed by someone who's never seen ice.' I stand by it." She leaned into his side, still laughing. "I like you better like this," she said. He showed her how to strip a wire without fraying the insulation, how to recalibrate a fuse, how to tell when a sensor was failing by the way its frequency wavered just slightly under strain. She watched everything. She didn't speak unless she had something worth saying. She never wasted movement. He liked that about her. By midday, the air inside the shelter had gone dry and warm, and Stuart stood to adjust the venting system. As he reached for the wall panel, Sarai stepped forward and grabbed one end of the supply cable spool without being asked. "I've got it," she said. "You sure?" Her lips curved upward, not a full smile, but close. "Don't make me prove it again." They hauled the cable together, moving in rhythm. For the first time, they weren't just occupying the same space. They were working, side by side. By the time they finished rerouting the line, the shelter's ambient lighting had stabilized, and the airflow no longer whined at the intake vents. It was the first time she'd touched him without pain, without obligation, without needing to. A gesture that said, "I'm here. I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you." He didn't pull away. Instead, he turned his hand so their palms met, interlocked their fingers. It was simple, and it was everything. Her eyes softened. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not giving up on me when I was too broken to believe I could be anything else." "You were never broken," he said, "just waiting to remember who you were." They stood there, hand in hand, as the shelter's systems hummed around them. The generator kicked softly in the background. Outside, the wind had calmed to a whisper, and in that moment, the cold no longer mattered. The silence didn't press down like it used to. It felt still, balanced. "I was afraid," she said softly, "that the more I healed, the more I'd remember the things they did to me. But that's not what's happening." "What is?" And for the first time in years, for both of them, there was no shame in that. Only strength. Quiet. Earned. Shared. The cold outside had begun to retreat. It was subtle, barely measurable. A degree or two. Maybe less. But Stuart noticed it in the way frost no longer crawled across the inside corners of the shelter window, and how his breath didn't fog as much when he stepped out into the corridor at night. Spring didn't exist on Arkin 7. There are no seasons, no thaw, just long stretches of silence, broken only by machinery and memory. But today, something felt different. So did she. Sarai moved through the shelter with a confidence that would have been unthinkable a few weeks ago. Her arm, once wrapped tight in cloth and trembling with even the smallest movement, was almost fully healed. Not perfect, not yet. But when she lifted a panel cover or twisted a seal into place, her hand no longer shook. She no longer winced. And more than that, she didn't ask permission anymore. "Stuart," she whispered, and he closed the distance. The kiss wasn't hurried. It wasn't clean or practiced. Their noses bumped slightly. Her breath caught again. But then her fingers curled around the fabric of his shirt, and his hand slipped to her jaw, and the kiss deepened. Not intense, not wild, but true. It was a question and an answer. A promise. When they parted, her forehead rested lightly against his. She didn't move away. "I've never done that before," she murmured. "You did fine." Her eyes opened. It felt like silence, but warm. He chuckled softly. "That's the best kind." They sat there a while longer, not speaking, just letting the world shift around them. The gravity of the moment settled between them like snow, silent, soft, inevitable. Later, she helped him finish wiring the panel. She worked slower now, more contemplative, like every motion carried new weight. She glanced at him often, not nervously, but with something closer to curiosity. Amusement. Instead, they sat on the floor together beneath the window slit, watching the filtered blue light from the dying sky settle across the floor in uneven shapes. Sarai's head rested against his shoulder. His arm curled gently around her back. She spoke only once more before drifting off. "Thank you for not rushing me." And he answered, just before her breath, even in his sleep, "I'd wait for you in any lifetime." When she slipped into dreams, her hand was still in his. And for the first time since Arkan 7 had swallowed him whole, Stuart Hale did not feel buried. He felt home. Morning came without ceremony. Light bled softly through the shelter's narrow window panel, tinting the air in shades of pale blue and silver. Arkan 7 remained as silent and frozen as ever beyond the walls, but inside, everything felt different. Not warmer, exactly, but steadier, softer, as if the cold had finally accepted their presence, acknowledged them not as intruders, but as part of the landscape now. The memory of where it hurt. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Every time I wake up and you're still here." There was no bitterness in the words, only truth. Sarai stepped closer, her eyes softening. "That's not hurt anymore." He held her gaze. "No, it's not." She reached for a cloth and began wiping down the surface of the table. It was unnecessary. The surface was clean, but it gave her hand something to do, something familiar. She had grown into this space, filled it with motion and presence and breath. She didn't hover at the edges anymore. She was part of it, of him. He set the wrench down and walked over to where she stood, brushing dust from his palms. She looked up as he approached, and for a brief second, the air between them paused. Like even the shelter had learned to hold its breath when they got this close. "You've done more than survive here," he said. She tilted her head, curious. "You've changed this place," he continued. "Changed me." As the shelter dimmed and the generator hummed into its nighttime cycle, Sarai leaned against Stuart, her arm curled around his, her head tucked under his chin. "Are you tired?" he asked. "A little." He kissed the top of her head. "Sleep then. I'll be here. You always are. And I always will be." She closed her eyes, her hand still held in his. And in that quiet, unbroken moment, without fire or threat, without fear or need, their story became something whole. Not a rescue, not a survival tale, but a beginning, a life hand in hand. On a planet where nothing was supposed to grow, something had, and it was beautiful. The morning came without alarms, without urgency. Just soft light spilling across the floor from the narrow window slit, filtered through the frost like milk through cloth. The wind outside was lazy today, less of a shriek, more a whistle, as if even the storm systems had grown tired of fighting. Inside the shelter, warmth lingered longer than usual. When they pulled away, Sarai pressed her forehead to his, eyes closed, breathing steady. "I could live like this," she whispered. "You are. I want more of it." "You will." He kissed her again, briefer this time, smiling against her mouth. They stayed like that for a long time, curled together under a blanket near the window, sharing heat, sharing breath, saying nothing. The world could have ended outside those walls, and they wouldn't have noticed. Because inside, something sacred had been born. Not survival, not safety, but joy. And on Arkan 7, in the ruins of a world that once had none, that joy was the most human thing of all. The support wraps were gone, replaced by a thinner glove Stuart had designed to protect the wrist joint and absorb vibration. It looked simple, just woven thermal mesh and a few embedded strips of memory fabric, but she wore it like armor. That morning, he found her standing by the back rack, lifting a crate of filtered coolant packs, one of the heavier ones. On instinct, he stepped forward to help, but she didn't need him. She shifted the weight against her hip, her brow creased in concentration, and carried it across the room on her own. When she set it down on the work table, she turned to him with a look that wasn't quite pride, but wasn't far from it either. "I didn't think I'd ever use that arm again," she said. "You did the work," Stuart replied. "You earned it." "I earned this," she echoed, almost to herself. He watched her flex her fingers. The movement was slow but smooth. "You said that last week," he teased gently. "This time I believe it." He smiled. Then her expression shifted, something quiet passing behind her eyes. She looked down at her hand. "There's a kind of fear that comes when you realize you're no longer surviving. That maybe you're ready to start living. He watched her, letting her speak. I keep wondering what happens next, she said. After the injury is gone, after the memories fade. What if I forget how hard it was to climb back? What if I stop being grateful for it? You won't, Stuart said. You carry it in how you move, in what you choose. That never leaves you. You just make space for other things. Her gaze flicked to his. Other things, she echoed. Like, he hesitated. Then, like peace. Like joy. Like connection. Her throat worked as she swallowed. And for a moment the room seemed to still around them. The heater clicked once. The light above buzzed faintly. I used to think silence was safety. Now it just feels empty when you're not talking. She smiled gently. You still like your quiet. I just like it more with you in it. A beat passed, then another. She reached for his hand, easily now, naturally, and laced their fingers together. You know what this place is starting to feel like? She asked. What? Home. He didn't say anything. He just stepped closer, closing the distance between them until their foreheads almost touched. The warmth of her hand steadied him in a way that nothing else ever had. Not the heater, not the structure, not even his own stubborn will to survive. You made it one, he whispered. Her breath trembled, but she didn't pull back. She moved forward, closing the gap the rest of the way. Their lips met in a kiss that was nothing like the first. The first had been a discovery, shy, uncertain, trembling on the edge of newness. This was something different. This was intentional. Affection. When the work was done, she didn't retreat to her cot. Instead, she stayed beside him as he sorted old equipment into neat rows. At one point, she brushed against his arm, then let her hand linger at his elbow. Not as a test, but as a kind of check-in. He looked at her. She didn't look away. Do you regret it? She asked. He didn't have to ask what it meant. No, he said. Not for a second. She nodded slowly, as if letting that answer settle somewhere deep inside her. Then she took a step closer and leaned her head briefly against his shoulder. I think I'm ready, she said softly, to be someone who gives. You already are. No, she said, not just in work or words, but in feeling. Her voice trembled just slightly on that last word. I don't need you to rescue me anymore, she added, but I want to stay anyway. That's different. He looked down at her. That's everything. That night, they didn't fall asleep right away. This was a kiss that knew what it wanted. It wasn't desperate. It wasn't hurried. It was quiet and full and alive. A conversation spoken through closeness, through pressure and pause, through the slow give and return of breath and warmth and promise. When they pulled apart, Sarai didn't let go. She kept her hand in his, her eyes searching his face. Was that okay? She asked softly. It was perfect, he said. Her thumb moved across the back of his hand. You never try to take anything from me. I never wanted to, but I want to give, she said. To be someone who chooses, who touches first, who kisses first, who stays. You already are. A silence stretched between them then, but it was rich with meaning, like music held between notes, like the glow of something not quite burning, but still alive. She leaned her head against his shoulder, her breath steady against his neck. I never thought I'd find this, she murmured. Not on a frozen planet. Not after everything. The heater hummed low, steady, and the smell of something faintly sweet drifted from the stove, boiled root starch, mixed with dried berries Stuart had been saving for weeks. Today felt like a day worth spending them on. Sarai stirred the pot with the back of a long-handled tool, hair tucked messily into a scarf tied around her head. She wore one of Stuart's thermal shirts, the sleeves rolled up to her elbows, her arms lean but strong. The faint shimmer of her green skin caught the light as she moved, and for a moment, Stuart just stood in the corner of the room, watching her. Not in awe, not in disbelief, just quiet happiness. I feel you staring, she said without turning. You're hard not to look at, he said. She glanced over her shoulder with a smile. That was shameless. I've been practicing. She tasted the stew with the tip of a spoon and tilted her head. It's edible. That's high praise coming from you. I mean, it might actually be good. He reached for her hand, warm from the pot handle, and held it in both of his. No one's coming, he said. There's no signal, no syndicate scout, No emergency out there. I know. This is our day. She squeezed his hand. Then let's make it real. They ate by the window, sitting side by side on the floor. The stew was thicker than usual, slightly sweet, slightly sour, but warm and nourishing. Stuart handed her the last piece of flatbread he'd saved, and she tore it in half without asking, giving him a piece as if it had always been that way between them. When they were done, they leaned back, looking out at the white, still world. A layer of ice hung like glass over the outer ridges. The remains of the old calm tower blinked faintly in the far distance. Nothing moved. Nothing intruded. It was perfect. After a long while, Sarai rested her head on his shoulder. Her hand found his and laced their fingers together. We don't have to do anything today, she said.